What if the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones destroying you? What if the hands that once held yours at the dinner table were the same hands that later pushed you out the door? This is not a movie. This is not a parable someone made up to fill time on a Sunday afternoon. This is real. Every single detail you are about to hear actually happened, and I know because I was there. Welcome back to Lumivora Soul Stories. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to tell you something important. Every story we share on this channel involves real people, real pain, and real miracles. The names and identities of those involved have been changed to protect their privacy, but the events themselves, every word is true. And today's story, this one in particular, it stayed with me for a long time. Because it's not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about what happens to a man who refuses to become bitter, even when the world gives him every reason to be. His name was John Lever, 60 years old. Silver hair, gentle eyes, calloused hands, the kind of man you might walk past on the street without a second glance. A quiet man, a simple man, a man who ran a small dry cleaning shop in a modest neighborhood. No employees, no machines doing all the work for him, just John. Every morning he unlocked that door himself. He pressed every shirt himself. He folded every jacket, hung every coat, and greeted every customer with the same warmth every single day. No shortcuts, no complaints, no desire to be anything other than exactly what he was. And what was he and her? Honest man. In a world that rewards cleverness and punishes sincerity, John Lever was the rare kind of person who slept soundly at night, not because his life was perfect, but because his conscience was clean. Now I need you to understand something about John, something that makes what comes later even more painful to hear. John was not a wealthy man. He was not an influential man. He had no political connections, no powerful friends, no safety net. What he had was faith, deep, unshakable, bone-deep faith. He believed, truly believed, that every door that closes has a reason, that every injustice has a record, that there is one who watches everything, misses nothing, and settles every account. He did not wear this faith like a badge. He simply lived it. When things went wrong, and they often did, he would take a quiet breath, look upward, and whisper, "I leave this with you." And then he would go back to work. John Lever's father was a man named Daniel Lever, and Daniel was everything John was multiplied. A successful businessman, a respected figure in the community, a man who built something real with his own hands. Daniel owned a large, well-established dry cleaning shop right in the heart of the city. Prime location on a main road, impossible to miss. The shop was fully equipped, high-quality cabinets, glass display cases for fine suits, coats, and formal wear, modern dry cleaning machines humming with efficiency, a full team of workers, and Daniel himself, always present, always watching, always pushing the standard higher. It was more than a business. It was a legacy. Daniel had 6 sons: Milan, John, Mikel, Trump, Alex, and David. 6 boys who grew up in the same house, sat at the same table, and were raised by the same father. And yet, they could not have been more different. John was not the most educated among them, and some of his brothers, the ones who went to better schools, got fancier degrees, and wore nicer suits, sometimes made sure he knew that. But here is what they never understood. Education and wisdom are not the same thing. You can fill a man's head with information and leave his heart completely hollow. John had something that could not be taught in any classroom. He could read people. He understood consequence. He felt the weight of his words before he spoke them. He knew that the choices you make in the dark will find you in the light. His brothers called it simplicity. God called it integrity. Now here's where I need you to pay attention, because what's coming next, it didn't happen overnight. The cruelest betrayals never do. They are built slowly, in quiet rooms, in hushed conversations, in handshakes made behind closed doors. And while John was pressing shirts and trusting in God, something was being planned, something that would shake the very foundation of his family, something that would force this quiet, faithful, gentle man to stand up in a government office in front of his own brothers and speak words that broke his own heart as he said them. Keep watching, because this story is only just beginning. Let me take you back, before the fighting, before the betrayal, before the tears. Back to when Daniel Lever was still alive. Back to when this family was still a family. Daniel Lever was the kind of father who believed that hard work was the greatest inheritance he could give his sons. Not money, not shortcuts, not connections. Work. He woke before sunrise every single day. He opened that shop with his own hands. He stayed until the last customer left. And when he came home at night, tired, sometimes aching, he sat at the dinner table with his family and smiled. Because to Daniel, this was the reward, not the money in the register. This, his sons around him, his home full of life. He was not a perfect man, but he was a present one. And the shop? It was his life's work, built brick by brick, decision by decision, year by year, perfectly located, impossible to ignore. The kind of business that practically ran itself by the time Daniel had finished building it into something remarkable. It was his greatest achievement, and he fully expected it to outlive him. When Daniel Lever passed away, the family he left behind was supposed to carry his name forward with honor. Instead, what followed was something that would have broken his heart. His son Mikkel stepped in to run the shop. Now, to be fair, Mikkel was already involved in the business during Daniel's lifetime. He knew the operations, he knew the customers, he knew the machines, so on the surface it made sense. But underneath the surface, something else was happening, something quiet, something calculated, something that John and Milan had absolutely no idea about. You have to understand the geography of this family to understand how the betrayal was designed. Trump, Alex, and David, three of the brothers, had quietly grown. Close over the years, not in the way brothers should be close, sharing meals, showing up for each other, celebrating each other's children. No, they were close in the way that people become close when they have a shared agenda, a shared target. And the target was the shop, Daniel's shop, the one on the main road, the one worth more money than any of them wanted to admit out loud. The meetings began in secret. Late evenings, closed rooms, voices kept low. Trump, Alex, and David, and their sons, sat together and asked each other the question that would poison everything. What are we going to do about the shop? The answer they landed on was not complicated. It was just ruthless. They would either push Mikkel out and take full control, or they would sell it entirely and then divide the money among themselves. 4 names on the agreement, 4 shares of the profit. Trump, Mikkel, David, Alex. That was the list. Milan's name was not on it. John's name was never even considered. Now, pause for a moment. Think about what that means. These were not strangers plotting against John. These were the same men who grew up calling Daniel Lever, the same men who sat beside John at their father's funeral, the same men whose children called John uncle. And they sat in a room together, deliberately, consciously, and decided, he doesn't matter. Cut him out. No argument, no guilt. Just a line drawn through 2 brothers' names like they were errors on a document, like they never existed. And who was the architect of all this? Who was the brain behind the paperwork, the legal maneuvering, the court documentation that would eventually make this theft look legitimate? Alex, the youngest among the conspirators, the one who worked inside the court system, the one who knew exactly which papers to file, which signatures to get, which loopholes to use. Alex was not loud about what he was doing. He was precise. He quietly made sure that when the time came, the documents would only show 4 names. He made sure that by the time anyone noticed what had happened, it would already be too late to undo. That is the most dangerous kind of betrayal. Not the kind that screams at you, the kind that smiles at you while signing your rights away. Meanwhile, John had no idea. He was at his shop, pressing shirts, greeting customers, coming home to his family. His eldest son, Ethan, was deep into his final year of medical school, brilliant, disciplined, quietly carrying his father's dignity into a future John had sacrificed to build for him. John's other sons were growing up watching their father, watching how he moved through the world without envy, without anger, without obsession. He never talked about money at the dinner table. He never spoke badly about his brothers in front of his children. He just lived cleanly and trusted. But trust, when it is placed in the wrong people, doesn't protect you. It just makes the knife go deeper because you never see it coming. And one day, without warning, the news reached John, not gently, not officially. The way all ugly truths arrive, through the mouth of someone who could no longer stay silent. The attack had already happened. The blood had already been spilled. The conspiracy that had been building in secret rooms for months had finally stepped into the open, and John Lever, the man who wanted nothing, asked for nothing, expected nothing, was about to find out that even nothing could be taken from him. There are moments in life that split everything into two halves, before and after, for John Lever. This was one of those moments. It started on an ordinary day, the kind of day where nothing feels different. The sun rises the same way. The birds sound the same. You make your tea, you lace your shoes, you head out the door thinking today will be just like yesterday. But for Michael Lever, that ordinary day turned into something he would carry in his body for the rest of his life. Trump's sons arrived at the shop, not as family, not to check in on an uncle, not with smiles or small talk. They came with anger that had been rehearsed, with fists that had already decided what they were going to do before they even walked through the door, and they attacked him, their own uncle, in his own shop, the shop their grandfather had built. The fight was not quick. It was not clean. It was the kind of violence that leaves marks, not just on skin, but on memory. Michael fought back as best he could, but there were more of them than there were of him. By the time it was over, Michael was badly injured, bleeding, shaking, and Trump's sons, they were already gone, vanished into the street like smoke, as if they had rehearsed the exit just as carefully as the entrance. Michael's sons arrived shortly after. They found their father, this man who had run that shop for years, who had shown up every single day, sitting in pain, surrounded by the broken evidence of what his own family had done to him. They were furious. Together they went straight to the police station. They wanted justice. They wanted accountability. They wanted someone in authority to look at what had happened and say, "This is wrong." But the police station had already been visited before them. Trump's sons, through their connections, through money, through whatever doors they had already opened, had made sure that when Michael arrived at that station, the ground was not level. The police listened, they nodded, they took notes, and then, in that particular way that corrupt systems have of doing nothing while appearing to do something, they referred the matter to the city mayor, not to court, not to justice, to a man sitting in an office who could be spoken to in private. The plan was working exactly as designed. And through all of this, Milan and John knew nothing. They were the two brothers who had been deliberately kept in the dark. Yao, two names that had been erased from the documents. The two men whose absence from every secret meeting was not accidental. It was intentional. Because the people running this plan knew something important. If John found out early enough, he might forgive too quickly. And if Milan found out early enough, he might fight too loudly. So they were kept out, kept blind, kept quiet, until the walls could no longer hold the secret. Word travels in families the way water travels through cracks, slowly at first, then all at once, and eventually. Both Milan and John found out everything. A few days after the attack, Milan came to John's house. John heard the knock at the door and opened it to find his eldest brother standing there, older than he remembered somehow, as if the news he was carrying had aged him on the walk over. John's face broke into warmth immediately. This was who John Lever was. Even in the middle of confusion, even before he knew what was coming, his first instinct was to welcome, to offer comfort, to make space. He brought Milan inside, seated him with care, brought water, put the kettle on, sat beside him, and gently asked, "What brings you here? Is everything okay?" Milan looked at his younger brother for a long moment, the kind of look that carries everything it cannot yet say. Then he spoke. "Don't you know? Trump's sons attacked Mikhail at the shop and seriously injured him." John nodded slowly. "Yes, I've heard about it." Milan leaned forward. His voice dropped lower, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he was about to say. Trump and his sons, along with Mikhail, Alex, and David, have joined forces. They're dividing our father, Daniel Lever's shop, planning to sell it, and after that, split all the money among themselves. He paused. And in that pause, in that small, terrible silence between two brothers sitting in a modest home, everything changed. They've completely cut you and me out of it. They're saying, we have no share in our father's business, that we have no connection to it at all. John said nothing for a moment. He just sat there. And then something happened that Milan did not expect. John, this quiet, faithful, steady man, broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The way a man cries when he has spent his whole life being strong and finally reaches the one thing he cannot carry alone. Tears ran down his face in silence, because John Lever was not crying about money. He was never crying about money. He was crying about something that cannot be priced, cannot be divided, cannot be recovered once it is gone. Family. He was crying because the people he had loved without condition had put a number on him, had weighed him on a scale of profit and loss, and decided he was not worth keeping. With a voice that barely held itself together, he said, "Am I not my father's son, just like the others? Why is my identity being taken away for the sake of money?" The room was very quiet after that. Milan sat with his brother's pain, unable to fix it, unable to take it back, unable to undo what had already been done. Finally, he reached over and said, "Why are you crying? We will claim our share. Tomorrow there's a meeting at the mayor's office. All the brothers and their sons will be there. We'll go too, in the evening." John wiped his face, took a breath, looked at his brother, and nodded. Not because he wanted the money, but because something inside him, something that had been patient and quiet and endlessly forgiving, finally needed to stand up and say, "Exist. I am my father's son, and I will not disappear quietly just because it is convenient for you." There are rooms in this world that feel different the moment you walk into them. Rooms where the air is heavier, where every chair feels like a witness, where the walls seem to lean in, listening. The mayor's office was one of those rooms, and on that day, it became a courtroom without a judge, a battlefield without weapons, a family's final breaking point, dressed up in formal furniture and fluorescent lighting. John Lever arrived that evening with his two sons beside him, Dr. Ethan on his left, Sam on his right. He walked through that door, not with arrogance, not with rehearsed arguments, not with a lawyer or a strategy or a prepared speech. He walked in the way he had always moved through life, quietly, honestly, with nothing to hide. Moment he entered, the room shifted. His brothers, Trump, Mikhail, Alex, David, were already seated, their sons arranged around them like armor. They had arrived early, positioned themselves, prepared. And then John walked in, and the shock on their faces was something that cannot be faked. Eyes widened, postures stiffened. Glances were exchanged across the room like emergency signals, because they knew John. They knew he was not a greedy man. They knew he had never in his life fought over money. So his presence here, in this office, on this day, meant something, had shifted, and that terrified them. Why is he here? That question moved silently around the room. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone was thinking it. Milan was already there. The moment he saw John, he stood up and called him over, seating his younger brother beside himself. Two brothers, side by side, the only two people in that room who had come without an agenda. The only two people in that room who simply wanted to be seen as what they were, their father's sons. The mayor began the proceedings calmly. He was a man who had seen many such meetings, families unraveling over property, brothers becoming strangers over square footage and selling prices. He listened first to Mikkel, the one currently running the shop, the one with the most visible claim. Then he listened to Trump, the one whose sons had started all of this with their fists and their fury. He heard both sides. He nodded, he made notes. Then he looked around the room and asked the question that opened everything. Does anyone else have something to say? Milan stood up, slowly, deliberately. He was the eldest brother in that room, older than every man seated there, and he carried that seniority in his posture as he rose. He opened his mouth to speak, and before a single word could leave it, Alex cut him off, sharp, immediate, cruel. You have no share in this shop. Just like that. No hesitation, no shame, no acknowledgement that this was his own elder brother he was silencing in public. The room went very still, and that is when John Lever stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not point fingers or pound the table. He simply turned to the mayor and spoke from somewhere so deep and so honest that every person in that room felt it, whether they wanted to or not. Sir, it deeply pains me to say this, but these are my brothers. They have become so blinded by money and property that they refuse to even accept me and my elder brother as family, even though we share the same parents. He paused. Let that land. Then continued. This shop belonged to our father, Daniel Lever, and as his sons, we all have an equal right to it. Simple words, true words, the kind of words that don't need decoration because the truth inside them is already powerful enough. Milan followed. He looked at the mayor and said clearly, Sir, we deserve an equal share in this shop, but our brothers have conspired together to take away our rights. And the moment those words settled in the air, Alex erupted. What came next was not an argument. It was an execution, public, deliberate, designed to destroy. Alex turned to the mayor, ignoring Milan entirely, as though he were not even present, and began to speak. He talked about Milan's past, his lifestyle, his choices, the hotels, the gambling, the alcohol, the women. He laid it all out. Every private failure, every personal wound, every moment of weakness that Milan had ever had, aired in front of his brothers, his nephews, a government official, and his own younger brother John. He has already taken his share, Alex said coldly. He used to travel to big cities, stay in expensive hotels, gamble, drink alcohol, and spend time with women. He has no claim left in this shop. The silence that followed was the loudest thing. In the room, Milan sat very still, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from a pain so deep it has nowhere to go, to be reduced to your worst moments, in public, by your own blood. There is no word in the English language that fully captures what that feels like, but everyone in that room understood it. And then, a chair scraped the floor. Dr. Ethan stood up, John's eldest son, the medical student. The boy John had sacrificed everything to educate, who had watched his father be humiliated his entire life and had stayed quiet, stayed respectful, stayed composed. Not anymore. His voice was steady, but his eyes were fire. He looked directly at Alex and said, "And what about you? Weren't you the same involved in gambling, drinking, and immoral relationships? Then how do you still have a share? The room held its breath. Alex's face tightened, but he did not look away. He replied with the coldness of a man who had prepared for this exact moment. At that time, there were no legal documents for the shop. I got everything processed through the court. And now, the documents only include 4 brothers. John and Milan have no share in this business. John's hand moved instantly. He reached over and touched his son's arm. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Stay quiet." Not because he was afraid, not because Alex was right, but because John Lever understood something in that moment that his son, young, brilliant, burning with righteous anger, did not yet understand. There are battles you win by fighting, and there are battles you win by refusing to become what hurt you. Ethan sat down, jaw tight, eyes glistening. The mayor stood. He called Trump's sons and Mikkel into his private chamber. The door closed, and in that room, away from witnesses, away from emotion, away from the 2 brothers who had come with nothing but truth, the mayor asked Mikkel directly, "Tell me honestly, do Milan and John have a share in this shop, or not?" Mikkel did not hesitate. "No, they don't. Milan already wasted his share on his lifestyle. And John has had his own small shop from the beginning. He has no claim here. I can even swear on it." The mayor returned. The room reassembled itself. Brothers, sons, witnesses, and 2 men whose fate had just been decided behind a closed door, without them present. The mayor cleared his throat and delivered his verdict. The shop will be sold. The money will be divided among 4 brothers, Trump, Mikkel, David, and Alex. As for Milan and John, he paused. They have no share. In this business, John Lever heard those words, and he did not explode. He did not argue. He did not beg. He simply stood up, nodded once, not in agreement, but in the quiet acknowledgement of a man who has just learned exactly what his family thinks of him. And he walked out of that room, past his brothers, past their sons, past the mayor's desk and the fluorescent lights and the formal furniture, out into the open air, where nobody could see what was happening to his face. There is a particular kind of walk that broken people take. Not fast, not slow, just forward. 1 foot in front of the other, eyes somewhere far away. The body moving on muscle memory, while the mind is still sitting in that room, replaying every word, every face, every moment that cannot be undone. That was how John Lever walked home that evening. The streets were the same streets he had always known. The same houses, the same neighbors, the same sky turning gold and then purple and then dark above him. But everything felt different, because he was different. Not broken in the way that makes a man fall down. Broken in the way that makes a man question everything. He thought he understood about the people he loved. He had walked into that office as someone's brother. He had walked out as nobody's. And somewhere between the mayor's office and his front door, the tears came, quietly, without announcement, the way John Lever did everything, without drama, without performance, without asking anyone to notice. He did not wipe them away, he just let them fall. Because sometimes the most dignified thing a person can do is allow themselves to feel exactly how much something hurt. When he reached home, his sons were waiting. They had not been in that private chamber when the verdict was delivered. They had not heard the mayor's final words, but they looked at their father's face the moment he walked through the door, and they understood everything. Way children always understand their parents' pain, even before a single word is spoken. John sat down. He took a long breath, and then he looked at his sons. These boys he had poured his entire life into. These young men who carried his name, and his values and his quiet dignity, and he told them the truth. All of it. "We have no share in your grandfather's shop." The words landed in the room like something heavy dropped from a great height. His sons stared at him. Ethan, still burning from what he had witnessed at the mayor's office, opened his mouth. John raised his hand gently. From today onward, His voice was steady, final, absolute. No one will talk about this matter again. Not because he was giving up, not because he agreed with what had been done to him, but because John Lever had decided, in the space between that office and this room, that he would not allow his family's peace to become another casualty of his brother's greed. He had already lost his inheritance. He would not lose his home as well. A little while later, a knock at the door. Milan. He came in and sat down, and within moments, the fire that had been building in him since the mayor's verdict came pouring out. "We deserve a share in that shop," he said. "We will fight them if we have to, and take what's ours." He looked at John, expecting agreement, expecting the same anger he was feeling, expecting his younger brother to finally say enough is enough. But John just looked at him, calmly, gently, with those tired, honest eyes, and said, "I no longer have any claim to that shop." Milan blinked. "I leave my matter in the hands of God, the one who runs this entire world. He will give me justice." Milan was quiet for a moment. He did not understand. How could a man be treated this way, robbed in broad daylight, humiliated in public, erased from his own father's legacy, and still sit here in this small house speaking calmly about leaving things in God's hands? Where was the anger? Where was the fight? But John was not finished. He looked down at his hands, these worn working hands that had pressed 1,000 shirts, folded 1,000 coats, built a small honest life from nothing. And he said something that silenced the room completely. "I don't care about the money. I just wish my brothers had not abandoned me." 6 words. I just wish they had not abandoned me. Not, I wish I had gotten my share. Not, I wish I had fought harder. Not, I wish I had been smarter, louder, more aggressive. Just that the wish of a man who valued belonging over inheritance, who would have traded every rupee of that shop's value for one moment of his brothers looking at him and saying, "You matter, you are one of us, you are Daniel Lever's son, same as we are." That was all he had ever wanted, and that was the one thing they had refused to give him. He straightened up then. Something shifted in his posture. Subtle, but real. Like a man who has put down a weight he had been carrying for too long. "I have raised my children with my own hard work," he said. "Have given them a good education. I am proud of myself, and I am proud of what I have built." Now pause. I need you to feel the full weight of what John Lever just said. This man had just been publicly humiliated. He had been legally stripped of his birthright. He had been told, by his own brothers, in front of a government official, that he was nobody, that he had no claim, that he did not belong to the legacy his own father had built. And his response was not revenge. His response was not bitterness. His response was not even sadness, not anymore. His response was gratitude. Gratitude for his children, for his work, for the life he had built with his own 2 hands. Because John Lever understood something that his brothers, with all their documents and their court connections and their carefully divided money, would never understand. What you build with honesty cannot be taken from you. What you pour into your children outlasts every property dispute, and what you leave in God's hands, He handles personally. Milan left that night still restless, still angry, still carrying the fire that John had refused to pick up. And John sat alone for a while, in his small house, in the quiet, just him and his thoughts, and the God he had always trusted. And somewhere in that silence, he let it go. Not the pain, that would take time, but the need to control the outcome. The desperate human hunger to make people pay, to make things fair, to force the world to acknowledge what was done. Wrong, he released all of it, and in its place, something settled. Something that felt, surprisingly, like peace. He did not know, could not have known, what was coming next. He did not know that God had already been working on something, quietly, patiently, in ways no human strategy could have arranged. He did not know that the very thing his brothers had tried to deny him, a home, a legacy, a place to belong, was already on its way, coming not through lawyers or mayors or legal documents, but through a knock at his door, from the most unexpected direction, at exactly the right moment. There is something nobody tells you about faith, not the poetic version of faith, the kind written on greeting cards and embroidered on pillows, the real kind, the kind that sits with you in a small house, in the quiet after everyone has gone, to bed when the injustice is still fresh and the hurt is still loud, and the logical part of your brain is screaming, do something, fight back, make it right. The real kind of faith is not the absence of that voice. It is the choice, conscious, deliberate, sometimes agonizing, to trust something bigger than that voice. John Lever had that kind of faith, and it was about to be answered in a way he never could have scripted. Life after the mayor's verdict continued. John went back to his shop, pressed his shirts, greeted his customers, came home to his family. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside that small house, a quiet pressure had been building for a long time. The family had outgrown it. His sons were becoming men. The walls felt closer every year. The rooms, that once fit a young family comfortably, now felt like they were asking a question. How much longer? John knew they needed more space. He had known it for a while. But knowing something and being able to do something about it are two entirely different things. He had no windfall coming, no inheritance. That door had been slammed shut and bolted in a government office. No wealthy relative about to hand him a solution, just his shop, his savings, his prayers, and the unshakable belief that somehow, some way, God would provide. Then, one morning, a knock at the door. John opened it to find his neighbor standing there. Not a stranger, not a real estate agent, not a lawyer with papers, just his neighbor. The man whose house shared a wall with John's. The man he had greeted for years across a fence, exchanged pleasantries with, lived beside in the ordinary companionable way of people who share a street. The man looked at John and said, "I'm selling my property." John waited, "And since it's right, next to yours, you have the first right to buy it." Then the man said something that stopped John completely. "I also know you need a bigger home." John stood in his doorway, and for a moment, just a moment, he could not speak, because he heard something in those simple words that went beyond neighborly courtesy. He heard an answer, not a coincidence, not good timing, not luck. An answer. From the same God he had trusted in that small, quiet room after everyone had gone home, from the same God he had said, "I leave this with you," 2 more times than he could count. He looked up briefly. The way people do when they are communicating with someone no one else in the room can see. "God, what is this plan of yours?" But then the practical reality settled in. John took a breath and said honestly, "I don't have the full amount you're asking for." He did not dress it up, did not pretend, did not try to negotiate from a position of false confidence. Just the plain truth, stated simply, without shame, because that was John Lever. Honest, even when honesty was inconvenient. The neighbor looked at him for a moment, then said something that changed everything. "I have to move to another city. You can buy this place and pay me in installments. Let that land for a moment." This man, this neighbor, this near stranger, was offering John Lever a house on trust. No bank, no credit check, no interest rate designed to bleed him dry. Over decades, just pay me when you can, when every official door had been closed in John's face, when his own brothers had looked him in the eye and said he had no right to anything, when the mayor had stamped his exclusion with the authority of government. A neighbor knocked on his door and handed him a future. John agreed. He went back inside and told his sons, and the house, That small, too tight, well-loved house, filled with a warmth it had not felt in a long time. Not the loud happiness of people who have never suffered, but the deep, quiet, almost disbelieving joy of people who have been through something and come out the other side to find that the sun still rises. The transaction was made. John paid what he could up front, took possession of the house, and then, in a gesture that was so perfectly, so completely John, he picked up a hammer and broke the wall between the two properties himself, connecting them, making them one. What had been two separate structures became a single home, larger, stronger, more complete than either had been alone. It was, without him intending it to be, a picture of everything he believed, that what God joins together cannot be separated by the schemes of men, that what is meant for you will find its way to you, not always through the door you expected, but it will arrive. And then John did, something that revealed everything you need to know about the kind of man he was. He bought sweets, boxes of them, and he went, personally, door by door, to each of his brothers' homes, to share the news, to offer them something sweet at a moment, when he had every reason to offer them nothing at all. But the doors that opened did not open warmly. His brothers heard the news, their wives heard the news, and not one of them, not a single face in a single doorway, reflected genuine happiness back at him. No embraces, no congratulations that came from the heart, just the particular cold politeness of people who are unhappy about your good fortune, but cannot say so out loud. John noticed. Of course he noticed. He was perceptive enough to read a room that was trying very hard to hide what it was feeling. He walked, home with his empty sweet boxes and his full heart, and chose, again, not to become bitter about it. But the story was not over, because the house was bought, but not yet fully paid for. The installments were coming, and John, ever the honest man, had already calculated exactly what he owed and when it was due. He needed help, not a handout. Not charity, just a temporary bridge from someone who had more than enough to provide it. And he knew exactly who to ask. He went to Alex, his younger brother, the court official, the architect of the conspiracy that had stripped John of his inheritance. The man who had sat in the mayor's office and coldly explained, with documents and legal precision, why John had no rights, that Alex.John went to him anyway. Because John Lever did not carry grudges like weapons. He carried them, yes. But he set them down when walking through a brother's door. He sat across from Alex and said simply, "I've bought a house, and I still have installments to pay. You've received your share from the shop. Please lend me some money, so I can pay off the remaining balance." Alex looked at his brother and smiled. The kind of smile that costs nothing and means even less. Of course, don't worry, he said warmly. When the time comes, I'll help you with the payments. John went home reassured, believing, because he always believed the best about people, that his brother had meant what he said. But when the time came, Alex was not there. He did not call, did not send word, did not acknowledge the promise he had made. He simply disappeared from John's calls, from John's visits, from any situation where the debt might be mentioned. And then, the final indignity, Alex's wife appeared at John's door. She stood there with an expression arranged into something resembling sympathy and said, "Brother, my husband doesn't have any money. Please don't pressure him." John closed the door and stood in his own hallway. The money he had paid, earned through years of pressing other people's clothes, through early mornings and late evenings, through a lifetime of honest labor, was now at risk. If he could not make the next installment, everything could unravel. The house, the dream, the wall he had broken through with his own hands, all of it, hanging by a thread. Because a brother had smiled and promised, and then looked the other way. John sat down. In that small hallway, in that connected house that was almost fully his, and for the second time in this story, he did not know what to do. He had trusted God, he had worked honestly, he had asked for help from family, and been turned away, again, the same family. The same pattern, the same silence where support should have been. He sat there, and he prayed. Not loudly, not desperately, just quietly. The way he always did. God, you brought me this far. I know you will not leave me here. And in the very next room, his son Ethan was already moving. There is a moment in every parent's life that makes every sacrifice worth it. Every early morning, every late night, every meal skipped so a child could eat, every dream quietly set aside so a younger dream could be funded, every pressed shirt, every folded coat, every customer greeted with warmth on a day when warmth was the last thing you felt. John Lever was about to have that moment, and he had no idea it was coming. Ethan had been watching. That is what people do not realize about children who grow up in difficult homes. They watch, they absorb, they file away every expression on their parents' face, every heaviness in their step, every moment when the person who is supposed to have all the answers quietly runs out of them. Ethan had watched his father his entire life. He had watched him press shirts with arthritic hands and never complain. He had watched him walk home from the mayor's office with tears on his face and hold himself together before walking through the front door. He had watched him buy sweets for brothers who did not deserve them. He had watched him sit across from Alex, the man who had stolen his birthright, and ask for help with genuine humility. He had watched him receive nothing in return, and he had watched him, just days ago, sit in a hallway with the weight of an unpaid installment pressing down on him like a physical thing. Ethan had watched all of it, and he had made a decision. He went to a friend, not a wealthy friend. Not a businessman or an investor or someone with money to spare, just a friend, the kind of friend that most people spend their whole lives searching for and very few actually find. The kind of friend who listens to the whole story without interrupting, who does not calculate what they stand to gain, who does not make you feel small for needing help. Ethan sat with this friend and told him everything: the shop, the conspiracy, the mayor's verdict, the neighbor's offer, Alex's broken promise, the installment coming due. All of it. He told it plainly, the way his father had taught him to speak, without exaggeration, without performance, without asking for sympathy. Just the truth, laid out honestly between two people who trusted each other. The friend was quiet for a moment after Ethan finished. Then he stood up. He left the room briefly, and when he came back, he was carrying a bag. He placed it in Ethan's hands, looked him in the eye, and said, "Return it whenever you can. No interest, no deadline, no conditions written on paper, just return it whenever you can." 5 words that carried more dignity and more grace than anything that had been said in the mayor's office that day. Ethan walked home with that bag. His heart was doing something complicated, the specific mix of gratitude and relief and emotion that comes when someone shows up for you in a way you did not fully believe was still possible. He walked through the front door, found his father, and held out the bag. John looked at it, then looked at his son, then back at the bag. He did not understand immediately. His mind was still in the hallway, still calculating, still searching for a solution that kept not arriving. And then Ethan explained. His friend, the money, the offer, with no strings attached. John sat very still as he listened, and when Ethan finished, something happened to John Lever's face that no camera could have fully captured. It was not just relief. It was not just gratitude. It was the look of a man who has spent 60 years believing that goodness is real and has just been handed proof. His eyes filled. Not the quiet tears of the walk home from the mayor's office. Something deeper. Something that came from a place that had been holding on for a very long time. He reached out and pulled his son toward him, and he held him. The way fathers hold sons when words are not enough, when the only language left is presence. He kissed his son's forehead, his face, again and again. The way you kiss someone when you are trying to say, "You are my greatest achievement," Everything I gave up was worth it. You are the answer to every prayer I ever whispered in the dark." He did not say any of that out loud. He did not need to. Ethan felt every word. John picked up the phone, called the house owner, and paid off every remaining rupee of what he owed, in full, that day. The house was his, completely, officially, permanently. The wall he had broken through with his own hands, connecting two properties, two spaces, two futures into one, would never have to be unbroken. This was his home, built not through inheritance, not through conspiracy, not through documents manipulated in courthouse corridors, but through honesty, through faith, through a son who had learned from his father that the way you live your life comes back to you, in ways you never expect, at moments you need it most. Now let me ask you something. Do you remember the brothers? Trump, Mikhail, David, Alex, the four names on the document. The four men who had schemed and plotted and signed and divided and congratulated themselves on their cleverness. They got the shop. They got the money. They got exactly what they had planned. For in years later, John Lever owned the largest home among all of them, not because he had fought for it, not because he had outsmarted anyone, but because he had lived in a way that allowed God to build something for him that no one could take. A way the brothers had taken a shop. God had given John a home, and there is a difference, a profound, irreversible difference between those two things. A shop can be sold, divided, stolen, manipulated away from you in a government office while you sit outside the door. But a home that is built on faith, on honesty, on the sweat of your own labor and the love of a son who watched you and decided to become like you, that home stands. So let me leave you with this, because this is not just John Lever's story. This is the story of every person who has ever been overlooked by the people who should have chosen them. Every person who has ever sat in a room and watched their name be crossed off a list by someone they loved. Every person who has ever been told by family, by systems, by the loud, confident voices of people with documents and connections and courthouse friends, "You have no share here. You don't belong. You don't matter." This story is for you, because here is what John Lever's life proved. Not in theory, not in poetry, but in actual events that actually happened to an actual man who actually lived this. Honesty is not weakness, patience is not passivity, and faith is not denial. It is the most aggressive act of trust a human being is capable of. When you choose not to become bitter, that is strength. When you choose to keep working after being robbed, that is courage. When you choose to believe that the God who created this universe is also personally managing the details of your life, that is not naivety. That is the most sophisticated understanding of reality available to a human being. John Lever never got his share of his father's shop. He never received an apology. He never got a phone call from Alex saying, "I was wrong. I am sorry. You deserved better." Some things in this life do not get resolved the way we want them to. Some debts are never repaid in the currency we expected. But John Lever ended up with something his brother's money could not buy. Children who were proud of him. A home that was entirely his own. A conscience that had never been compromised. And a story, this story, that is still being told. If this story moved you, if something in John Lever's quiet, unbreakable faith reminded you of someone, or of a version of yourself you are still trying to become, then let this channel know. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because somewhere out there, right now, there is a person sitting in their own hallway, carrying their own unpaid debt, their own unanswered prayer, their own version of a mayor's verdict. And they need to know that the story does not end there. It never ends there. Keep going, keep working, keep trusting, because what is meant for you is already on its way. This has been Lumivora Soul Stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.